The Baltic Sea, Bornholm Basin. A fishing trawler hauls its net aboard in the grey light of early morning. Among the cod and flatfish, something else comes up. A corroded, barnacle-crusted metal cylinder, unmistakably a shell casing, leaking a faint, oily residue that begins to blister the skin of the crewman who picks it up. He has no way of knowing it, but he is holding a fragment of one of the largest chemical disposal operations in military history. A stockpile of German nerve and blister agents that the Allies decided, in the desperate months after May 1945, simply to sink. 80 years later, it is still down there. Most of it always will be. This is not where the war against chemical weapons ends. It is where it goes quiet and sinks out of sight. By the summer of 1945, occupying forces across the 4 zones of defeated Germany had uncovered an almost incomprehensible arsenal. 296th 103 tons of chemical warfare agents and munitions, tabun, sarin, mustard gas, phosgene, packed into bombs, artillery shells and rocket warheads, scattered across storage depots, the retreating Wehrmacht had never had time to destroy. The scale dwarfed anything the Allies had planned for. There was no established doctrine for disposing of an enemy's chemical arsenal at this magnitude, no international framework governing what should happen next. The occupying powers convened what became known as the Continental Committee on Dumping and reached an agreement striking in its simplicity. Each of the 4 occupying nations would destroy the German stockpile found within its own zone, by whatever method it judged most convenient. For the United States and Britain, convenience meant the sea. The American effort, designated Operation Davy Jones Locker, ran from June 1946 to August 1948. Convoys of obsolete cargo ships, loaded to their holds with captured German ordnance, 30 to 40,000 tons of chemical munitions in total, sailed out from northern European ports under naval escort. 9 were scuttled in the Skagerrak Strait, the narrow deep-water passage between Denmark and Norway, where the North Sea meets the Baltic. 2 more went down in the North Sea itself. The method was blunt. Charges placed below the waterline, crews evacuated, and within minutes, an entire cargo of nerve agent and mustard gas munitions sliding beneath the surface into water, often exceeding 1,000 meters deep. The operation's name drawn directly from the old sailor's idiom for the ocean floor, a fitting label for a program built entirely around the idea of making a problem disappear. Britain's disposal followed a longer and stranger road before it, too, ended in the sea. In October 1945, in an operation codenamed Dismal, roughly 14,000 tons of captured tabun bombs were shipped from Hamburg to Newport Docks in South Wales, then moved by rail across the country to a remote, disused airfield at RAF Landrog in North Wales. There, on the cracked runways of a station that had briefly trained wartime aircrew, the bombs were stacked in the open air, arranged so that any leaking vapor would be carried harmlessly out to sea by the prevailing coastal wind, an arrangement that reveals, more clearly than any official report, how improvised the entire post-war chemical disposal effort truly was. The bombs sat at Landrog for nearly a decade. By the mid-1950s, corrosion had begun to compromise their casings, and authorities judged further storage too dangerous to continue. The resulting operation, codenamed Sandcastle, moved almost 71,000 tabun-filled bombs by sea to Cairnryan in southwest Scotland, where they were loaded aboard 3 redundant vessels for scuttling. On 25 July 1955, the SS Empire Clare departed Cairnryan carrying just over 16,000 bombs, its cargo badly distributed, and giving the ship a visible list to starboard as it was towed out under naval escort. 2 days later, in a stretch of the Atlantic roughly 80 miles northwest of Northern Ireland, demolition charges sent the Empire Clare to the bottom in a controlled, steady sinking, its cargo settling more than 2,000 meters down. The MV Vogtland and SS Kotka followed with the remainder of the stockpile, each carrying some 26,000 bombs, until the entire tabun arsenal Britain had captured a decade earlier rested permanently on the Atlantic floor. Not everything went to the deep ocean. Closer to home, in the shallow, narrow trench of the Beaufort Dyke between Scotland and Northern Ireland, authorities dumped a further quantity of British-manufactured mustard gas and German phosgene rockets, choosing proximity and convenience over the depth and distance that had governed the Atlantic operations. It was, in every practical sense, The same logic applied at a smaller scale. Remove the danger from land as quickly as possible and trust the sea to keep it out of reach. The friction in all of this rarely made it into official communiques, but it shaped the operation at every stage. Loading plans went wrong, as they did aboard the Empire Clare, producing dangerously unbalanced cargoes that had to be corrected before departure. Escort tugs broke down mid-voyage, as the Empire Clare itself did, forcing entire convoys to slow to the pace of the weakest vessel. Industrial action on the Clyde delayed departures by days at a time, leaving armed nerve gas convoys waiting at dockside for tugboats caught up in a labor dispute that had nothing whatsoever to do with chemical warfare. None of these were the problems military planners had trained for. They were the ordinary grinding friction of moving dangerous cargo through an exhausted post-war transport network. And they slowed a program that officials wanted finished as quickly and quietly as possible. The disposal effort was never intended to be permanent in the sense of erasing the danger, only in the sense of removing it from immediate view. Corrosion does not stop at the seabed. Decades of saltwater exposure have steadily weakened the casings of munitions dumped across the Baltic and North Sea, and in the Bornholm Basin and the waters off Denmark and Poland. Commercial fishing trawlers have periodically hauled up corroded ordnance ever since, sometimes causing chemical burns to crews unaware of what their nets had recovered. What was designed as a final solution to an urgent 1945 problem has instead become a slow-motion environmental question that modern navies, marine researchers and fishing communities are still managing 80 years later. An afterlife the original disposal planners neither anticipated nor were equipped to address. The scattered nature of the dumping only compounded the long-term problem. Beyond the Skagerrak and the Beaufort Dyke, additional documented disposal sites lie off Vogtland, Bornholm, and in the Little Belt Strait between the Danish islands, each holding its own uncounted tonnage of corroding ordnance from the same 1945 to 1948 window. In 1958, a barge and a lighter that German forces had scuttled in the Little Belt in the war's final days, never part of any formal Allied disposal program at all, were rediscovered still laden with thousands of tons of chemical weapons, a reminder that the documented dumping operations sit alongside an unknown number of undocumented wartime disposals nobody planned or tracked at all. In recent decades, growing recognition of the corrosion risk has prompted new international efforts, including a NATO-led program known as Operation Open Spirit, aimed at locating and safely managing unexploded chemical ordnance still resting on the Baltic floor, a slow, methodical cleanup answering questions the original planners of 1945 never had to ask. Debriefing assessed as a disposal and risk management problem rather than a combat operation, the destruction of Germany's chemical weapons stockpile reveals three defining pressures and one enduring legacy. First, the sheer scale of the discovery. Nearly 300,000 tons of chemical agent spread across 4 occupation zones overwhelmed any existing disposal doctrine, forcing the Allies toward the fastest available method rather than the most permanent one. Sinking ships was not chosen because it was safest. It was chosen because it was immediate. Second, national approaches diverged sharply even while pursuing the identical goal. The American program moved with relative speed between 1946 and 1948, while Britain's tabun stockpile sat in open storage at a disused Welsh airfield for nearly a decade, before Operation Sandcastle finally moved it to sea, a decade during which corrosion, weather, and simple administrative inertia were the primary forces determining outcomes rather than any coordinated strategy. Third, the operational friction, unbalanced cargo loads, mechanical breakdowns, labor disputes delaying armed convoys, demonstrates that even a program built around a single, brutally simple objective, get the danger out of sight, still had to contend with the same logistical fragility that shaped every other aspect of Britain's exhausted post-war infrastructure. The enduring legacy is one the original planners could not have fully reckoned with. What was designed as a permanent solution has instead proven to be a deferred one, corroding steadily on the seabed and periodically resurfacing quite literally in the nets of fishermen who had no part in the war that put it there.